everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Traver, Director of Traver Gallery, and I am here with our featured artist, Curtis Steiner. We're going to do a walkthrough of the exhibition. This show is Sentient. It's a group of incredible watercolor and gouache paintings that you made during the pandemic.
It's true.
We're thrilled to have Curtis's work here in the gallery. This is his first exhibition at Traver Gallery, although you are well known for your incredible jewelry, curation, other unique artworks that you've been doing for as long as I can remember.
I've always been an artist, but this is the first time I've had a show of specifically of watercolors, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a beautiful exhibition. So we'll walk through, we'll talk about the work, learn a little bit about Curtis's history and how he approaches making work, and yeah, enjoy. So Curtis, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to make this body of work and a little bit about your process?
Well, during the pandemic, I realized that I had some time, and it was really a gift of time that allowed me to explore watercolor. Watercolor requires a lot of patience. It's very demanding. You need to let it dry, and you need to move it around on the page so that it doesn't bleed and or wick. And so I decided that I was going to explore that medium and do larger pieces and do very abstract pieces. That's what I'm interested in these days.
So what are we looking at here? I mean, this is this appears to be these kind of layers of color. How are you achieving that?
Well, I always start with a wash, so I don't want to paint. You might not be able to see this on the camera, but I don't like to paint on a white background. I always like to do a light wash of some pigment, and then I start again with that next pigment. And if you look at the largest silhouette here, which is to say this very, very fine line here, that's all of the first layer of wash. So this is an entire wash on this piece that I had to control and make sure that it wasn't pooling or bleeding. And then I have to let it dry, and then I do another one and another one, and more sheer layers of color until I get to this central kind of character or drama here in this case. So when I get down in this part, the pigment is so dense that it requires really more dry brush. So dry brush is when you take watercolor that is as dry as possible, yet still wet, and lay it down on the page. And it's a way you're able to build up a really dense, rich pigment with watercolor. So that's the way I did this one. This one is kind of an anomaly in a way, in that I stopped sooner, and the core is more sort of rounded and less sinewy or less ribbon-like. This one really reminds me of dancing headdresses. Like this may be a hijab, and this one a Turkish war helmet, and this one a royal Chinese hairdo. And they're just all amongst each other, and there's this energy and this vibration that I really hope that I achieve in that. So it's sort of suggestive of some sort of communication or an activity.
Yeah, you touched on this just briefly now. These are, of course, abstractions, but a lot of these paintings do have the feeling of figures, or they're suggestive of relationships or dynamics. Can we take a look at a couple others, and maybe this one, I think in particular to me, sort of suggests like two people kind of coming together, leaning in for a kiss, dancing.
One of the things that I do is I like to kind of develop this figure in the center, and how I do that is I kind of apply my own parametric ideas or parameters, I suppose. And so in this case, I really wanted these larger shapes to have a sort of magnetism here, where they're attracted to each other but not quite touching, and this creates this sort of form. And slowly I'm making it more dense and more figural. And people often call them totems. They often say that they do look, this one particularly is joyous and looks like it's dancing. I love the kind of arabesque of this.
Yeah, the use of color is really amazing in these pieces. Maybe we can get a close-up here. Just the tightness of these lines in here is really incredible. Are you doing that all freehand?
Yes, I don't use anything to measure. I don't use any pencil marks. I don't use any rulers, no computers, just me and a paintbrush. And one of the ways I'm able to do that is because I had for many years practiced and studied calligraphy. So I'm able to do these big movements more than what most normal people can, only because I was trained to do it. I trained by myself. But so I apply that, and I have the sensitivity and the sense of what an elegant kind of line would be. And so I'm thinking of a line as in like this part here, these sort of shapes. And so that's part again of my like connection to parametric design. And that just kind of creates those shapes and this connection.
Beautiful. Let's take a look at a few others.
This one here is one of my favorites. I feel it was one of the first ones that I framed. And so what I'm doing with the frames is I decided that, and this was after all of the work was done, I decided that I was going to do the framing myself and that I was going to do the matting myself. And in this case, I've used yarn dyed linen and 19th century silk velvet. So this is the very same velvet that was used to cover the inside of jewelry boxes or very fine millinery. And I was able to match the colors and even some of the strength. So in this case, the density of the green kind of creates this beautiful, what I would call velvety surface, and then that relates very much to the velvet. And then the linen, which is more translucent, more sort of diaphanous, which you would maybe wear in the summer, right? So all that lightness really relates in color and in weight to these very pale washes. And also this particular piece was one of the first times that I did these kind of pulsing circles. So what I've done is I've kind of do these circles and slowly get smaller and smaller until they're almost not touching. And as soon as I get to that point, I start to connect them, and then I won't let them get smaller. I just let them get thinner, and then I arrive at these beautiful lines. And this one, of course, is very, it looks to me very much like a vegetal.
So for those who are watching who may know your background and the gallery that you own for many years, I think it will come as no surprise that you've used materials in this way. But can you share a little bit about that and how you approach materiality and your interest in antiques? And
so the gallery that I owned, that I started in 1999, what I loved to sell was eccentric objects, beautiful objects that were beautifully made, had beautiful materials, and really eccentric. So when you go to somebody's house and you find that they had a lot of different things, yet there was maybe one or two things that you thought, that is an amazing object, I wish I owned that. It might have a story, it might just be so mysterious that you can't help but be attracted to it. And so that was really the kind of thing that I like to sell, just those things. And I had a store full of that and full of jewelry. And so I think I really developed a vocabulary of materials.
one of the things I love about this particular body of work is that I think you've actually created that kind of eccentric object, that object that somebody can, it is a painting, of course, at its core, but by using the linen and the velvet in the way that you have, it really becomes an object, a sculpture in a way, something that occupies space.
That was my intention as well. You know, the frames are in this beautiful velvet that is really tactile, and yet there's sort of a manifestation of this same central piece here. And so what I kind of feel like is it becomes a vortex, a window that is physical that brings you into the piece and makes you live in there a little bit, and vice versa. So the piece lives with you and it becomes an object. Some of them, I think, really become more, even more sort of clearly figural. This one, I feel like there's the color palette is subdued, even though it's quite red. But the gray and the red together, I think, is just sort of implies a kind of a touching story, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. This one has kind of a tenderness to it. To me, I see almost like two figures, one in sort of a protective stance or something.
A lot of people have described this as sort of a Madonna and child, or a parent and a child. But there's definitely this sense of them, a solemn sort of protected being here, or two beings connected as well. And it really, I think, illustrates that the energy between them, as well as the sort of quiet connection.
I think there again is a great example of how you use that wash in the background to create a sort of softer texture in the work. And you've described to me how it kind of helps your eyes relax a bit.
It does. I even though we have a white gallery, all of the work has some darkness applied to it, and it really is like coming out of the light into the dark, or vice versa. And so when you're in a dark room, it takes your eyes a little bit of time to adjust, but then it allows light in it. It makes you sort of be calm and open to the colors and the nuances. This particular one, you could see where it seems like I've applied some sort of lighter color at these tight little squished places, and I haven't at all. And I wouldn't be able to achieve that without having a darker color, so that you could see this lightness. And it's really just an optical illusion, but a beautiful one, and one I try to achieve all the time within these paintings. This one has that, I think, is very effective.
Yeah, it's almost as if when you kind of stand back from it, they go out of focus, and as you approach, the definition, the clarity of the line becomes apparent. And like you said, that those little points where they come together almost appear to be lit.
It's true, right? Well, one of the things I've always loved to do is make soft forms out of strong lines. And in this case, I'm making these very defined areas kind of end up being diffused. So up close, it's very, very tight, very strong. You get to look at the craft of it all. And then when you get far away, it becomes this diffused, almost cloudy image.
Should we keep looking at some of the other paintings?
Sure.
How many paintings are in this show, Curtis?
There's 42 paintings in this, and I did in the last 2 years about 150 paintings, and we edited it down for this particular show, really just trying to make a sublime collection of work, though there's a lot more work that's not being shown in this particular gallery. You
alluded to this at the beginning of our discussion, but this is a body of work that really came about when you decided at the beginning of the pandemic to kind of conclude the chapter of your life that involved your gallery space.
Well, yes, I've always been a working artist. I have work all over the city. I've had work in the Seattle Art Museum and other public spaces. But I did that simultaneously to having a gallery myself in a retail store. And so now that I'm unencumbered by that, I was able and am able to paint full time, I love to do that work, and to be able to focus just specifically on developing this series. And I did it kind of really in secret. Nobody knew I was painting except for the closest friends. And even they didn't see much of it. And it really was because I wanted to develop a series that was my own, that I didn't kind of change or adjust because I thought people didn't like it or they had some suggestion. I really wanted to decide myself. And it maybe was because I had been with the public for so long that I didn't have an opportunity to have this to myself.
Right.
And to have really a true voice.
Yeah, I will, I think as I see, your work, this work in the context of the other work that you've done, I also recognize that there is an attention to craft here. And I know that is something that you have always been very like your work is always precise and clean and with a real attention to detail. And it's not something that I associate with watercolor generally. There's a looseness to watercolor typically.
Yeah, most people like to let the paint
run
do what it
and
wants
do
to
what
do.
it wants to do. And yet here, you use the watercolor so beautifully in creating these really soft layers and textures, but there is that tightness, that real attention to the line quality and controlling the material.
Well, I think I choose to do that because first off, it entertains me. I love to challenge myself as far as with the materials. And I also feel like because watercolor is used more often with very loose work, I felt like that I would be able to make a more original piece of art or series of art. And I chose watercolor too because I feel like particularly with this kind of color gradation, that it's often done in oils or in acrylics. It's often done with tape, and they just apply it in a different way, even though they're trying to maybe sometimes do a very similar thing. But you rarely see it in watercolor. And I think watercolor is just such a beautiful surface. There's almost nothing like it when you get just dense pigment. So with acrylics and with oils, there's all of this, there's other things included that make it less transparent. And when it is transparent, it's generally shiny. And now I have this really beautiful, transparent, yet matte finish. And I think it's really satisfying and tactile. Sometimes you really want to pet them. Like this one in particular, I think has that feeling where the silk velvet is so close in character to the slash there. And even this kind of, the nap of the silk has this high, gorgeous color just at the edge, and this has a similar thing. Even though, again, all these paintings were done well before I even knew I was going to frame them in this material.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this line quality that you get here,
yes,
that's actually a function of the watercolor, right?
Right. This, imagine, right, if we look at this particular area, so this big oval was a single wash, and so it's, before all of this was applied, it was all this color. So a big pool of water that I had to use gravity and gently roll around the water and the pigment without disturbing the layer underneath, without enacting the old wash below it. And so as it dries, it kind of goes like a drop of coffee on a piece of paper. It dries darker at the very edge of that wash. But what if I did it very slowly, and I don't do this slowly, I do it quite directly and with purpose. And so I very quickly go over this, and I don't mess around with that surface. So if I was going here and I was like trying to rub this out, I'd ruin this and there'd be a kind of a big white mark or something like that. So I have to be very quick, very gentle, very exacting. And then that creates this beautiful ripply ring effect and this beautiful, beautiful edge.
Should we take a look in this last room here? There's a couple of paintings in this last kind of collection of work that I think are particularly effective in creating that sort of diffuse effect that you talk about. This sort of apricot colored one in particular, I think, does that so successfully.
Yeah, this one I decided to be, you know, a little more minimalist and have a lighter palette and larger forms. And then I also made the magnetism, so where the pools are attracted, going out rather than in. And so there's this very sort of narrow, tight connection here and a looser one here. And it almost created as if these two forms were together and then pulled apart. Or if I like rubbed it out, if you go back 20 paces, suddenly this becomes very diffused and almost like I just like done that with it.
I think it's also a really good example of how this work relates to the other work that we represent in the gallery. I mean, we're obviously best known as a gallery that represents glass in particular and sculpture more generally. So it's not common that we do a exclusively painting-based show. But I do think that your work brings in this attention to material, as we discussed earlier, and then also this sort of luminousness that is really, I think, responds in an interesting way to the glass that's in the gallery.
Well, I'm exploiting watercolor just like a glass artist might. So glass artists are mostly using transparent glass, and they're allowing the light from outside or from the background to illuminate their work. And I'm doing the same thing. So the paper behind it is all white, and that's what's shining into your eye, and that's what's sort of illuminating, again, the work and how it does relate so beautifully to glass. You feel like, we don't have any glass right now in the gallery, but when I have had this next to some of the pieces that you have here, I just thought that the marriages were beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it's really sublime. There's a couple here that, particularly this one, I thought you had a piece that related beautifully to this one, color-wise and form-wise. There's an Italian technique with bars or little
little canes
straws,
of glass.
Canes of glass, where they do that.
Yeah, the reticello, or I mean, cane working in general, I think, where you get these beautiful kind of patterned effects where things can kind of go in, use the light in different ways, you know, make it more or less diffuse using transparent, you know, opaque glass or sandblasted glass. I think you create these incredible similar effects using just the watercolor.
Thank you. Well, this one I think in particular has too that effect where it feels like it's illuminated from behind, whereas even these parts where it looks light, it's actually the exact same color as here. It's just an optical illusion. And then having this sort of peach color going into this beautiful viridian color. And I love too the way this velvet relates here. It just has the subtle nuance that this has, and this relates here. And this one reminds me, if you've ever been on vacation and at the sea, and you're in the water and sunset, and you see these beautiful light refractions coming off of the gentle waves, and it's kind of just a magic moment. I think all of us have had that same experience, and I think this one is kind of has that same feeling, like you could be in the water and on vacation.
Yeah. They do really transport you. I think they're really incredibly evocative pieces, and it's some very meditative, some very lively. And I would say that for those of you who are watching, you know, the color is not going to come through exactly right on camera, but you know, your use of color is extraordinary. The way that you pair colors, think about color, and really, if you have an opportunity to come in and see this show in person, I encourage you to do so. They're extraordinary pieces. Any other things that you want to mention before we sign off here?
Well, I love being here, and I really wish people would come and visit me and visit you and visit the work. I think it's worth seeing in person. You just can't get it across on film.
Yeah, absolutely. The show is in the gallery through the month of September, and we hope you'll come in and see it in person. Check it out on the website if you're not in the area, of course, and then, of course, we'll be looking forward to a future show with you. So
I'm excited about that.
Can't wait. All right. Thanks so much, Curtis. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.